Good afternoon, students. And today I'm going to go over with the week 3 different kinds of essays. And so in this class, you're going to be writing different kinds of essays. The first essay one you're going to write is narrative essay, where you write about an important event in your life and how that affected you. The most common mistake that I'm seeing in the narrative essays is that you need to have a moral to your story. You need to have a thesis statement. Because the difference between an essay and a story is that when you write an essay, you make a claim and then you back up that claim with your body paragraphs. And so take a look at my teacher feedback. And then if you have any questions, you can always email me and then I will answer your questions. So for this video, I'm going to go over different kinds of essays. So without further ado, I will share my screen. And then we are going to talk about different kinds of essays. And so in essays, when you write essays, okay, there are different kinds of rhetorical modes. Rhetoric means argument. In other words, different ways to argue a point, different ways to tell people different kinds of essays. So the first kind of rhetorical mode we're going to go over is narration. So narration simply means to tell a story. Okay, so the way in which we can effectively communicate through language. So that's what a rhetorical mode is. Narrative writing is the art of telling stories, a factual story, a story based on and faithful to actual events as they happen in real life. A fictional story, a made-up or imagined story. Major narrative events are conveyed in chronological order. Chronological order is a method of organization that arranges ideas according to time. Transition words and phrases for expressions of time. Afterwards, currently, next, finally, until, as soon as, during, now, later, whenever. And you can use these transition words to transition and link your ideas together or link your paragraphs together. The basic components of a narrative: plot, the events as they unfold in a sequence. Characters, the people who inhabit a story and move it forward. Protagonist, the main character of a narrative. Conflict, the primary problem or obstacle that unfolds in the plot that the protagonist must solve. The ultimate message a narrative is trying to express. It could be either explicit or implicit. When writing a narrative essay, start by asking yourself if you want to write a factual or fictional story. Then free write about topics that are of interest to you. Once you have a general idea of what you will be writing about, you should sketch the major events of the story that will compose your plot. These events will be revealed chronologically, and the climax is the highest level of the conflict. In other words, it's the most exciting part, and it builds up to a suspense. Okay, so as you write your story, you want to build it up to make it more and more exciting, and this will motivate the reader to want to read your story because it's getting more and more exciting. So when you write your 5-paragraph story, you should have your thesis, in other words, your moral, like what is you have your hook, 5 background sentences, your thesis statement, and then you have your thesis statement will be the life lesson that I learned from this experience was that I must learn to swim before I jump into this deep end of the pool. Okay, so that's the life lesson. Then paragraph 2 is the setting. And you have the setting. It was a warm summer day, and I decided to go swimming. My friends were jumping into the deep end of the pool, but I still had not mastered how to float and how to fully swim or tread. But I wanted to have fun with my friends, so I decided to jump into the deep end of the pool, even though I don't know how to swim. Okay, now paragraph 3. rising action. In other words, the action that makes it more and more exciting. So that's paragraph 3. As I was treading and treading, I found I couldn't float. I started sinking. I put my head up to try to get some air. I started floundering. I started panicking that I was going to sink and drown. Okay, that's rising action, meaning it's getting more and more exciting. Climax. I could not maintain my floating, and I started sinking to the bottom of the pool, and I was running out of air, and everything was going dark. Suddenly, I felt a strong hand under my waist, pulling me back up to the surface of the water. It was the lifeguard saving my life. So that's the climax. You're almost about to die because you've sunk to the bottom of the pool and you don't know how to tread water. Okay, now the last part, the 5th paragraph, resolution. So then you repeat the life lesson, and you would say, the life lesson I learned that day is that if you're going to go into the deep end of the pool, you better know how to tread water, or else you're just going to sink like a rock to the bottom of the pool and die. So that's your life lesson. And then you're going to summarize the story. So that is a narrative essay where you tell a story about your life, and you do use story structure: setting, rising action, climax, resolution. That's it. Beginning, middle, end. That is the classic story structure. And that's how you're going to write. That's one way to write your narrative essay for essay 1. And there is a climax, okay? So narration is the art of storytelling. Narratives can be either factual or fictional. In either case, narrative should emotionally engage the reader. Most narratives are composed of major events sequenced in chronological order. Time, transition words, and phrases are used to orient the reader in the sequence of a narrative. The 4 basic components of all narratives are plot, character, conflict, and theme. The use of sensory details is crucial to emotionally engaging the reader. A strong introduction is important to hook the reader. A strong conclusion should add resolution to the conflict and evoke the narrative theme. So that's the narrative essay. That's the art of storytelling. Illustration. Now that's a different kind of essay. Illustration essay clearly demonstrates or supports a point through the use of evidence. The controlling idea of an essay is called a thesis. It's also and it's the same thing as the moral of the story. A thesis is one sentence that summarizes your entire 3-body paragraphs. So a sentence that presents the controlling idea of an essay. A thesis statement is often one sentence long and states the writer's point of view. When writing an illustration essay, keep in mind, use evidence that is appropriate to your topic as well as appropriate for your audience. Assess how much evidence you need to adequately explain your point depending on the complexity of the subject and the knowledge of your audience regarding that subject. So the structure of an illustration essay, the controlling idea or thesis belongs at the beginning of the essay. Evidence is then presented in the essay's body paragraphs to support the thesis. Order of importance. You place the most important point in your 4th paragraph. In other words, your 3rd reason. So order of importance is an effective approach to the illustration essay, a method of organization that arranges ideas according to their significance. So writing an illustration essay, decide on a topic you feel interested about. Create an interesting introduction to engage the reader. So your introduction should have a hook, 5 background sentences, and a conclusion. And the thesis should be at the end of the introduction and the first sentence of your conclusion. Phrases of illustration. So these tie your ideas together. So an illustration essay clearly explains a main point using evidence. When choosing evidence, always gauge whether the evidence is appropriate for the subject as well as the audience. Organize the evidence in terms of importance, either from least important to most important, or from most important to least important. Use time transitions to order evidence. Use phrases of illustration to call out examples. So that is an illustration essay. So an illustration essay illustrates a point. So for example, if I want to say that Los Angeles has many great schools, okay? So that is an illustration topic. And then, for example, UCLA, USC, Stanford University. So California has, did I say California or Los Angeles? Okay, let me change that. California has 3 great schools, USC, UCLA, and Stanford University. And so you would use these phrases, transition phrases of illustration. So you would say UCLA is a great school to go to. And that's because of its diverse student body. For example, many international students go to UCLA. Case in point, many Chinese students, French students go to UCLA. Another great school, or another example of a great school, is USC. USC has a great film department. So here I use the example. Another example is USC, which has a great film department. So when you want to illustrate a point, you write an illustration essay, a descriptive essay. The description essay, okay, uses description in writing. Writers use description in writing to make sure that their audience is fully immersed in the pages, in the words on the page. So description essays are essays that typically describe a person, a place, or an object using sensory details. Sensory details, descriptions that appeal to our sense of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. The organization of a descriptive essay follows spatial order. So spatial order is a method of organization that arranges ideas according to physical characteristics of appearance. So for example, a descriptive essay would be, in front of the professor is her computer. Next to her computer screen is Professor H's printer. The bookcase is next to the printer, and so on and so forth. So when you describe a place, when you describe how someone looks, and in week 3 forum, when you describe your favorite food post, then you are appealing to the sight, sound, and smell to get the reader to have a mental picture and experience your description. The more you can get the reader to experience your description, the better and more compelling your writing will be. So choose a subject. Once you have chosen the person, place, or object you want to describe, then your challenge is to write an effective thesis statement to guide your essay. The remainder of your essay describes your subject in the best way that best expresses your thesis. So, for example, I want to describe myself. Professor H is a flexible, patient, kind teacher. Okay, there you go. I'm a great teacher. And then you would write, Professor H is a flexible teacher. She doesn't mind if you're late from time to time, as long as you tell her ahead of time. So she's flexible. She's kind because she gives fair grades. She bases it on a rubric. And I forgot what the third one was. But anyway, so you have your 3 adjectives describing the person. And then those 3 adjectives become your body paragraphs. And you want to appeal to the 5 senses, okay? So description essays should describe something vividly to the reader. using sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. A description essay should start with the writer's main impression of a person, place, or a thing. And then a classification essay. A classification essay is used a lot in science. You classify animals, you classify the different parts of your body, anatomy, you classify all the different psychological things that can go wrong with you. You classify mental health disorders. So classification is when you put things into groups. Okay, so if I write 3 kinds of students that go to UCLA are students, international students, transfer students, non-traditional students, and traditional students. That's a classification essay because I just classified the different kinds of students that go to UCLA. And so a classification essay answers the question, what are the different kinds of fill in the blank? That's a classification essay. So to break down a subject into smaller, more manageable parts. So the subject could be students of UCLA. Now you want to break it down. What students of UCLA? International students, transfer students, traditional students, non-traditional students, okay? And so the thesis statement would be many kinds of students go to UCLA. International students, transfer students, traditional students, non-traditional students. And then those 4 classifications or 3 classifications then become your body paragraph, okay? And so the thesis should explain how that topic is divided into subgroups and what. So the subgroups would be the different kinds of whatever the groups you want to name. And then each body paragraph will focus on that one group. And that's how you write a category, a classification essay. Let's see, I'll read through this. The only reason why I'm going to read through this is not because I'm going to bore you to tears, like death of PowerPoint. It's because all this stuff is on your test. So this will help you with the test. The classification essay opens with an introductory paragraph that introduces the broader topic. The thesis should then explain how that topic is divided into subgroups and why. Each body paragraph of a classification essay is dedicated to fully illustrating each of the subcategories. The conclusion should bring all the categories and subcategories back together again to show the reader the big picture. Topic plus subtopic plus rationale equals your thesis. And so the purpose of a classification essay is to break a subject into smaller, more manageable, more specific groups. Smaller subcategories help us make sense of the world, and the way in which these subcategories are created also helps us make sense of the world. A classification essay is organized by its subcategories. Process essay. Process essay is how to do something, how to become rich, how to be a good teacher, how to be a good person. So anything how to is a process essay. So a process analysis essay is an essay that explains how to do something, how something works, or both. The process analysis essay opens with a discussion of the process and a thesis statement that states the goal of the process. The organization of a process analysis essay follows chronological order. The steps of the process are conveyed in the order in which they occur. So for example, step 1 in making how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Step 1, you have 2 pieces of bread. Step 2, you put butter on one side of the bread, on one side, jelly on top on that side. Then you put peanut butter on the other side, and then you smash the 2 together, and there you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So step 1, step 2, step 3 would become your body paragraphs. And that becomes a process analysis essay. And each step is in chronological order. And the body paragraphs are constructed based on these steps. If a particular step is complicated and needs a lot of explaining, then it will likely take up a paragraph on its own. But if a series of simple steps, like the one with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, then the steps can be grouped in a single paragraph. So what I just gave an example of is a process analysis paragraph. It's only if you want to have how to put together, how to fix your computer. Okay, that will have lots of steps with lots of paragraphs. So if you have a more difficult thing to explain. So anytime you have an instructor manual teaching you how to do something, that's a process analysis essay. And so choose a topic that is interesting, relatively complex. Don't just write one paragraph like I just did with the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I just did that as an example, for teaching. Body paragraphs are composed of the steps in the process. Each step should be expressed using strong details and clear examples. The conclusion should thoroughly describe the result of the process described in the body paragraphs. A process analysis essay explains how to do something, how something works, or both. The process analysis essay opens with a discussion of the process and a thesis statement that states the outcome of the process. The organization of a process analysis essay typically follows a chronological sequence. Time transition phrases are particularly helpful in process analysis essays to organize steps and orient the reader. A definition essay is what is a good wife? What is freedom? What is love? And then your thesis statement is a definition. A good wife is someone who obeys her husband, or a good wife is someone who is an equal partner to her husband, is affectionate and funny. So a good partner, affectionate, funny. It's the same thing as a descriptive essay, and it also is the same thing as an illustrative essay. All the different rhetorical modes overlap. And so a definition essay can be considered a descriptive essay. So they all overlap. The purpose of a definition essay is to simply define something. The definition essay opens with a general discussion of the term to be defined. What is freedom? What is a good wife? You then state your thesis, your definition of the term. So a good wife is affectionate, equal partner, and funny. And then the rest of the essay, equal partner, affectionate, and funny, would be your body paragraphs. And you choose a topic that will be complex enough to be discussed at length. Start your essay with an introduction that establishes the relevancy of the term. The thesis always comes at the end of the introduction, and it should clearly state your definition. So therefore, I would say Martin Luther King was intelligent, compassionate, and brave. And then those three descriptors will then become the body paragraphs. So definitions establish the way in which people communicate ideas. They set parameters for a given discourse. Context affects the meaning and usage of words. The thesis of a definition essay should clearly state the writer's definition of the term in the specific context. Body paragraphs should explain the various facets of the definition stated in the thesis. The conclusion should pull all the elements of the definition together, and then you would restate your thesis, your definition thesis, as the first sentence of the conclusion, and then you summarize your essay. Comparison contrast. That's going to be your essay 2. So your essay 2 is when you compare and contrast two similar things. You're going to compare and contrast adulthood versus childhood. You're going to compare and contrast, and then you're going to take a position. You're going to say adulthood is better than childhood, or fruits taste better than vegetables, in order to keep it interesting. So when you compare two things, you're comparing how two things are similar. And when you contrast two things, you're comparing how two things are different. And so a compare and contrast essay analyzes two subjects by either comparing them, in other words, talking about their similarities, or contrasting them, talking about their differences. The key to a good comparison contrast essay is to choose two or more subjects that connect in a meaningful way. So you want to compare two musicians or two pieces of fruit or two, you don't compare a musician to an apple, okay? You would compare an apple to a pear, and you would compare one musician to another musician. So they got to have some kind of similarity. So the purpose of conducting the comparison contrast is not to state the obvious, but rather to illuminate subtle differences or unexpected similarities. For instance, you wouldn't say something like, during the daytime, that's when the sun comes out. During the nighttime, the sun goes away. Okay, that's just too obvious. You don't want to just state what everybody already knows, because you're going to make people fall asleep. So find something that's different, something unknown, something unusual. Okay, so the compare and contrast essay starts with a thesis that clearly states the two subjects that are to be compared and contrasted, and the reason for doing so. So adulthood is better than childhood. So therefore, you clearly state that you're talking about adulthood versus childhood. And then don't state obvious things like children like to go out and play while adults have to go to work. Like, okay, that's just so obvious. And so instead, state your preference. I prefer childhood because when I was a kid, back in the boomer days, we were able to ride our bicycles without any helmets and any safety issues, because back then, people didn't realize that you had to wear a helmet to stay safe. Boy, I loved my childhood. But when I became, but in adulthood, it's just too full of responsibilities, because now I hold a job in an ER hospital and I'm stressed out all the time. And so when you talk about yourself like that, it makes the essay interesting. I have a lot of students who simply write, childhood is a time when you're little and you play all the time and you go to school. I'm like, that's what everybody did when they were a kid. So why would you rewrite the obvious that everybody did? So when you want to write something, it's got to be for a purpose. It's got to be something that's original to you, that would make the reader not waste his time spending his time reading your essay, and then the reader can learn something about you. So that's what's interesting about a comparison, especially if you're doing easy topics like that. If you're going to do a hard topic like COVID versus RSV, which are medical conditions, then you want to write a full comparison and contrast complete with all the details, which might be obvious to you as a medical professional, but the rest of the world, they don't know all that. Okay, so that when it's something complicated, it's okay to make a full comparison and a full description. But when you're writing simple topics, try to figure out a way to relate that to your life, and in order to keep it interesting. That's a common mistake. And I can't even see this. Oh, I see. All right, you have two different methods of writing a comparison contrast essay. So either you could use the block method, although what do they call it here? Organized by subject. Okay, so they call it organized by subject, or the alternate method. They call it organized by point. It's the same thing. So when you have a block method, but since you have to memorize it for your test, the organized by subject method, you would write about, let's say I'm comparing fruits and vegetables. So then paragraph 2 is going to be about fruits. Paragraph 3 is going to be about vegetables. And paragraph 4 will be the conclusion. So when you do the block method, that's usually 4 paragraphs. And when you do the point by point, side by side, and what do they call it here? Organized by point or alternative method, same thing. You have 5 paragraphs. See? 5 to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why? Because the first paragraph, you have your hook, 5 background sentences, and your thesis. That's 1 paragraph. And then you have paragraph 2 will be reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. And I have 3 reasons for your paragraph. So if I say childhood is much better, I like childhood better than adulthood because I got to play all day, no bills to pay, and no job to go to. And so I got to play all day, no bills, no job. That becomes my 3 paragraphs for why I like childhood versus adulthood. So that's point by point. It's just like your 5-paragraph essay. So then you would use phrases of comparison contrast would be so fruits and vegetables are very alike. One similarity is blah, 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 blah. Another similarity is blah, 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 blah. Both fruits and vegetables are really good tasting. So that sort, and that sort of thing. So if everything is the same, then if you're going to talk about something different, well, fruits are different than vegetables. One difference is that I think personally fruits taste better than vegetables. Another difference is fruits have more liquid in them. So if you're thirsty, fruits are a better choice. So et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or unlike fruits, vegetables are much better as fiber for digestion. So there you go. So those are the different ways in which you can have comparison and contrast. In other words, compare is similarity, contrast is differences. So writing and just choose whether you want to compare seemingly disparate subjects, contrast seemingly similar subjects, or compare and contrast subjects. Introduce the topic with an engaging opening paragraph. The thesis comes at the end of the paragraph, and it should establish what it is you're comparing. The body of the paragraph can be either subject by subject or in other words, it could be the block method or the alternate method. I believe you guys, they call it, okay, organized by subject, organized by points. It's the same thing, block method, alternate method. Let's see. It's funny how every textbook has its own terminology. So the organizing strategy that you choose will depend on your audience. And so if you're going to use the organized by subject method, that's the block method, then it's a very easy topic and you're not going to say very much. If you're going to have a more complicated topic and you have a lot to say, you should use the organized by point way of doing it. In other words, the 5-paragraph essay. Key takeaways. Compare and contrast essay analyzes 2 subjects by either comparing them or contrasting them. The purpose of writing a comparison contrast essay is not to state the obvious, but to rather illuminate subtle differences or unexpected similarities. The thesis should clearly state that the subjects that are to be compared and contrast, and it should state what is to be learned from doing so. And then you've got the 2 different kinds, and then you have 2 main ways of doing it, and you organize the subject, organized by the subject themselves, one then the other. Cause and effect. A cause and effect essay tries to determine how various phenomena are related. Sometimes the connection between the cause and effect is clear, but often determining the exact relationship between the 2 is very difficult. The cause and effect essay can be organized in one of the following 2 primary ways. Okay, so you could either write an essay about a whole bunch of causes, like the cause of World War II was cause 1, cause 2, cause 3. The effects of World War II would be effect 1, effect 2, effect 3. So for me personally, I tell students to separate causes and effects. It makes much easier writing. And you would use phrases of causation as a result, because, hence, let's see, World War II started because there were so many reasons. Writing a cause and effect essay. Choose an event or condition that you think has an interesting cause and effect. Introduce your topic in an engaging way. Let's see, sleep deprivation causes loss of cognitive function, brain fog, and eventual dementia. In other words, if you consistently don't sleep enough, when you get old, you're going to be very, very forgetful very fast because you use up your brain. And your brain needs rest and sleep. And if you don't give your brain rest and sleep, you're going to get dementia. That's cause and effect. The cause would be lack of sleep, and the effect would be dementia. So the purpose of the cause and effect essay is to determine how various phenomena are related. The thesis states what the writer sees as the main cause, main effect, or various causes and effects of a condition or a condition or event, like sleep deprivation. The cause and effect essay can be organized in one or two primary ways. You either talk about a whole bunch of effects, or you talk about a whole bunch of causes. Strong evidence is particularly important in cause and effect essay so that you could determine the connections between phenomenon. In other words, if I say sleep deprivation occurs because sleep deprivation causes cognitive decline or cognitive, like you can't function very well. Well, then you got to back that up with medical evidence. You got to back that up with APA formatting. And if you're going to cite medical facts, you have to cite your source. So that's an example of if you use if you have a difficult subject, or if you use a lot of numbers, you have to cite your source to avoid plagiarism. And then in weeks 9 and 10, you're going to write a persuasive essay. You're going to go to the procon.org website, and you're going to write an essay where you convince the reader of your point of view. So that's going to be week 9 and 10. Did I say that right? Yeah, weeks 9 and 10. Yeah. And so here, so when you write a persuasion essay, you have to convince others of your point of view. And then you take a position, you state your position in the thesis statement. And so then you use credible evidence to back up what you're going to say. And so you have an introduction and thesis, opposing and qualifying ideas, strong evidence in support of claim, style and tone of language, third person case usually, and a compelling conclusion where you repeat the thesis statement, and not restate the thesis statement. You could use slightly different words, and then you summarize the essay in 5 sentences. And then not necessarily for this class, and for this class, it's voluntary. You could write a counter argument paragraph where you write about what the other side says, and then you rebut what the other side says by refuting, and you look for the weaknesses of the other side. And this usually occurs in paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 is usually the counter argument, but I don't usually require it for this class. It's usually for the class, though this school doesn't have it. Most schools have 2 different writing classes: the basic class where you just write a persuasive essay, and then the next level, the next class up, you write your argumentative essay where you include the counter argument and the rebuttal paragraph. But all you have to do, okay, so don't worry about that right now. You could try it, challenge yourself. If you're already a fluent writer and you think writing a persuasive essay is boring, you can then up the ante and go knock yourself out and write your counter argument, paragraph, and rebuttal. Okay. If you think a persuasive essay is barely enough for you to hang on to, then that's all that's required for this particular basic writing class. So acknowledging opposing ideas and limits to your argument. So be sure to acknowledge opposing ideas. Avoiding ideas that conflict with your own gives the reader the impression that you are uncertain or unaware. In other words, when you write a counter argument paragraph and you show the reader that you're aware of what the other side thinks, it gives your essay a more balanced opinion. Then the reader knows you know both sides of the issue, and that makes you more credible. So addressing, you can place the opposing arguments in your, with many different places actually. You can actually place it in your introduction or in your 3rd paragraph. I usually teach this in my other class. Anyway, address opposing arguments earlier rather than later in your essay. Order your positive arguments last, allows you to better address conflicting ideas. You also leave your reader thinking about your argument rather than someone else's. And when you rebut the other side, you have the last word. So establish the limits of your argument in your counter argument paragraph and what you are trying to accomplish, and then you rebut what the weaknesses in the other side, and that's how you have the last word. And yes, although, of course, though, granted, that are all, they're talking about, there are two kinds of counter arguments. You've got the Rogerian, that's also not covered in these PowerPoints. Two kinds of ways in which you can write how the other side argues. You could either do it through a Toulmin. In other words, you just simply state, many people think that smoking is glamorous. Young people think that if they smoke, they look adult and mature. However, that's when you pivot to your thesis statement. Smoking causes all kinds of cancer. So that's called Toulmin. You just write the other side, boom, state your side. That's Toulmin. Rogerian is when you concede to the other side. And you would say that, just like you Republicans, we Democrats want to build a better country with better healthcare, a better economy, and a strong, have a strong presence of America abroad. Okay, just like you, we Democrats want the same goals as you Republicans do. Okay, that's conceding to the other side. You're saying that the other side is right. Then you pivot to, however, my thesis is that we Democrats are better than you Republicans at having a strong economy or having a nice, friendly presence abroad, etc., 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 etc. That's called a Rogerian argument, where you concede a little to the other side, and then you make your argument. Okay, so then you would say, granted that, still, and yet. And the reason why we do a counter argument is to prevent bias. If the reader knows that you can argue both sides of an issue, then that means that you're not biased and that you're objective. And that's how you find credible evidence, actually. That's how you know that what you read is credible. And when you have no bias, that is the O in Kapow. I will go over that later. So let's go over what's bias. So the strength of a personal bias is that it can motivate you to construct a strong argument. The weakness of bias is that when it takes over the essay, such as when you neglect opposing ideas, you exaggerate your points, you repeatedly insert yourself, that is using first-person case, too much. That shows that you have a personal bias. The use of I can make your argument sound overly biased. Excessive use of any word will eventually catch the reader's attention, and not in a good way. So the insertion of I makes you sound very, self-centered. And so that's why I tell my students that you're supposed to write in third-person case, he, she, they, because when you write in third-person case, you focus on the facts. If you use first-person case, I, my, us, we, our, we're focusing too much on the writer. If I say you, then you're focusing too much on the reader. So to focus on the facts, you say he, she, they, okay? And you would say, let's say the name of the student is Sheila Smith. So Sheila Smith would have to write about herself in third-person case so that the focus is not so personal. So you want your persuasive essay to be objective. Statements. So a fact is something that can be proven scientifically, something that has objective reality. Opinions, personal views are personal views or judgments. All opinions are not created equal. An opinion in argumentation must have legitimate backing. Usually an opinion is something that cannot be proven. Like if I were to say, there are green aliens in the back of the moon, dark side of the moon. And opinions, you don't usually agree. You don't usually believe opinions, especially if people can't back it up. So if someone writes an opinion with no evidence, then it becomes a stereotype. It becomes propaganda. It becomes, in other words, it becomes something you don't believe in. Just like on social media, people put all kinds of opinions on social media, and then a lot of people believe it, and it's not true. And you end up with lots of misinformation when people mistake opinions for facts. Facts are when you can prove it with scientific experiments. That's the difference between fact and opinion. And most people confuse the two together. And that's why we have so much misinformation. And I blame it mainly on social media. Adding visual elements to a persuasive argument can strengthen the persuasive effect. So you can, in other words, you could put charts. If you have a lot of numbers, then put it in a chart. I'm not going to read all of that. And choose a topic that you feel passionate about. Begin with an engaging introduction. Start by acknowledging and explaining points of view that may conflict with your own. State the limits of your argument. Use a balance of facts and opinions from a wide range of sources, scientific studies, expert testimony, statistics, and personal anecdotes. But don't focus just on yourself, because then you sound like you're writing what I did over the summer, second grade kind of a composition. It's better to use yourself sparingly and write from case studies from research. Make sure that your style and tone are appropriate for your subject and audience. Tailor your language and word choice to these two factors while still being true to your own voice. Write a conclusion that effectively summarizes the main argument and reinforces your thesis. So the purpose of persuasion is to convince the reader of your point of view. An argument is a reasoned opinion supported by evidence. A thesis expresses the opinion of the writer is better than one that is vague. So don't write vague thesis statements. You always have topic, opinion, reasons. It is essential you not only address counter arguments, but also do so respectively. And to persuade a skeptical audience, you need a wide range of evidence, scientific studies, studies from experts, historical precedent, statistics, personal anecdotes, and current events are all types of evidence that you might use in explaining your point. Facts are statements that can be proven. Opinions are personal opinion. Opinions are personal views that cannot be proven. So we don't believe in opinions. Quantitative visuals means that you have a lot of numbers, you put it into a chart. Qualitative visuals, qualitative means a narrative description in words of what something is. Quantitative is when it's a description in numbers. And whenever you have a quantitative anything, in other words, anytime you use numbers, you have to use APA, because some researchers spent years coming up with those numbers. So here are the key terms to keep in mind for chapter 3, or for week 3. Yeah, for week 3, and so rhetorical modes, different ways of arguing and writing different kinds of essays. Narrative writing, where you're writing a story about yourself, and it can be factual, true or false. And you have rising action, climax, and then you have falling action, and factual story is true. Fictional story is something you make up from your imagination. Chronological order is when you have events in sequence. Plot is what the whole thing is about. Protagonist is the main character, usually the good guy. Antagonist is the one that's the bad guy. Conflict is when you have two people, two things that don't agree with each other. theme is that's like a thesis. Those are the main ideas of your story. An illustration essay is when you want to illustrate a point. And then thesis is the main idea of your essay. Order of importance. In other words, you can either have it from least important to most important, or most important to least important. The reasons of your essay. Sensory details is what we're doing in week 3 forum, where you want to appeal to the very 5 senses for your description. Wow, there's more. I didn't know there was more. This is the last one. Description essays is when you have spatial order. In other words, in front of Professor H is her computer screen. Next to Professor H is her printer. Okay, so that's the order in which things are located. That's spatial order. Classification is when I say the different kinds of students who go to UCLA are international students, traditional students, non-traditional students, when you name things in a group. Process and analysis, how to be rich, how to become a good person, that kind of anything how to. And context means that you give the 5 background sentences before your thesis. It also can be the paragraph 2, which is setting, where you talk about the history of what's happening. Comparison is when you have 2 similar things. You're comparing 2 similar things. Contrast is when you're comparing 2 things that are different. Compare and contrast is when you compare either how something is similar, compare, contrast, how 2 things are not similar. And cause and effect is when you talk about either the causes of World War II or the effects of World War II. And like sleep deprivation causes dementia. Persuasion means that you want to convince the reader of your point of view. Argument is when you state in your thesis a clear position and you argue your point and back up your claim with credible evidence. Facts can be supported by scientific study. Opinions cannot be proven. Quantitative visuals, that's when you use numbers and to prove your point. Qualitative visuals is when you use words to prove your point. That's it. This is an easy chapter. But I think all the chapters are easy. Anyway, so I know this is a really long video, but at least I covered everything that it is that you need to know for this week. And hopefully this can help your week 3 quiz too. So anyway, not many people are going to watch to the end of this video, but if you do, I congratulate you that you made it all this far. Most people will just kind of, after 10 minutes, that's it. So, and when I watch other people's videos, I last about 5 minutes. Then I sit in 5-minute intervals for several days. That's how I digest somebody's 1-hour video. It actually takes me several days to finish a 1-hour video like this. But hey, I finish it and I take notes. So anyway, if you like this video, let's see, it's the stop button. Yeah. So if you like this video, feel free to subscribe to the Professor H Writing channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time and have a great week.